Hi, my name is Patrick Riggs and I'm a web developer and I support renaming the Jack and Coke to the Lemmy.
If we just start off with how you started using computers and how that got you to where you are today?
Sure, yeah. Sometime in the mid-'80s, I don't know what year exactly, I was born in 1979, so I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. My father brought into the household a Macintosh SE2, which was my first computer. Most people around my age, I think 36 right now, seem to know all about the Commodore 64. We never had the Commodore 64. We jumped straight into the Macintosh. And that came into the household and we learned to play video games on Dark Castle. It was called Dark Castle and we played that for quite some time and that machine followed us for a couple of moves. My father was in the US Army and we moved around a bit. And from there, the next big leap was into the Tandy 1000 RL, which was a Radio Shack model, I believe. And from there we had a Packard Bell, and I started my first bulletin board system in the American Southwest. And my machine fielded phone calls from other people's computers, and they played one person at a time, you know, text-based games and MUDs. And then some time went by and I joined the American Army myself in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, and I joined it doing computers. And from there I ran a help desk, worked on the help desk and did field engineering and fiber optics and that sort of thing. And then I taught myself how to write HTML. And then from HTML I moved on to PHP, and then I moved on to Perl, which was kind of backwards. Most people know Perl first, and I've been writing websites and taking care of Linux systems ever since.
Would you like to offer any reflections on the changes that you've seen in the computers over that time?
Yeah, there was a brief period of time where I wasn't doing computer work at all professionally. I was just doing it on the side, and I came back into it, and it was, even though it's been with me since I was very young, the amount of change is staggering. Just year to year, even month to month sometimes. It's just very fast paced, and if you blink, you'll miss something. And it's almost a full-time job just keeping up with the current events, even in your own job. If you don't pay attention, you'll miss something very critical usually. The amount of progress and how we struggled to cope with that technological process as a society and as a people. Sometimes it's very hard at times. It's like our tools are developing so much faster than we're capable of dealing with, all the second and third order of effects, and it's been interesting watching not just the technology grow, but humanity reacting to it at the same time.
You said we learned to play games. Was that you and your father or siblings? Or?
Yeah, it was my brother and I. My brother's about 1.5 years younger than I am, and he also does computers now. He's not a web developer, but he works with Dell back in the United States, and he's on a contract that supports the IT infrastructure of the folks in that company. And we both learned to play Dark Castle, and then in some strange way we went from, if I recall correctly, the Macintosh and Dark Castle to the Atari. I think at that point it was a second-hand Atari, and we played all the usual games. And I remember the frustrating E.T. game and Ghostbusters. That was also, I think Ghostbusters sometimes misses, people don't, when they think about difficult Atari games, sometimes they forget Ghostbusters in favor of E.T. So yeah, my brother and I, so we grew up on the computers, and the poor man, I think I mostly took over the computer, and he was kind of shoved off to the side at times. So despite my best efforts, apparently, he still somehow managed to make a career in IT, taking care of folks and computers and such. So the both of us, we both had.
So what was it that made you take that direction?
Well, Well, I actually had signed up professionally speaking, I'd signed up in the Army for a completely different job. It wasn't IT. And through a long, convoluted process, I stumbled into the job with computers, and I didn't even realize which job I had picked until I showed up to the school. If you've ever been in the military service for anybody, you'll know how strange the journey can be sometimes. And I showed up to the school, and I saw all my class come back from the schoolhouse that day, and I turned to somebody standing next to me and I said, "Oh, by the way, what do they teach here anyway?" And they said, "Oh, computers." And I said, "Oh, that's fantastic. I did that before I joined the Army." So it was just a hobby up until it wasn't a hobby anymore. I didn't kind of go that direction, but it has treated me very, very well over the years, especially during the period of time. I didn't have a college degree, university. I just kind of went that route. And in IT, you don't always need that. You might need that to progress, but you don't always need it to get into it. And that did me well in my youth, when I just couldn't be bothered to go sit into a classroom. Just give me something to pound away at and fix. So that worked out. So I kind of stumbled into it as a profession. It just worked out.
You said your dad brought the Mac home initially. What was his reason for buying a Mac?
Sure. He in the Army he worked on satellite systems, ground stations, and things like that. So he was up on engineering and of that variety of mentality, and he also happened to just like toys. And I think I had a chat with my mom recently about this, and I asked her what exactly was whose role between you and Dad was involved in bringing the computer along for the ride. And she just said, "I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. All I knew is he kept coming home with new toys and things, and I would have to look at him and say, 'You're not the one balancing the checkbook. Stop it.'" So I think for him, and I get that from him too, except in this case, I'm mostly doing the checkbook. So, but I'm able to. So I think he just liked the toys, and he just liked the things bringing home. And I, at least once a month, a couple of times a month, I really do think about how that little, he could have ignored it. It could have been something he could have ignored. You know, I don't know what it did to the household budget, but he brought them home, and because of that, both of his sons have careers in this stuff. So it's just the exposure. It's not like we took a lot of classes for it. We just the exposure to it allowed us to. So
it wasn't taught at school at that point?
No, I didn't take an actual computer class until I was in the American 7th grade. It was a typing course, and that's where I learned the actual home row keys and everything. And so between learning home row keys, on those were Apple IIe's, so I did have some exposure on that. But later on, I learned my typing went from that slow pace to, I have clocked myself at 125 words per minute, and that was exclusively due to CompuServe chat rooms and BBSs, and just wanting to keep up with the flow of conversation. That's a good way of learning how to type quickly. So I don't know.
You said you ran some bulletin boards, did you?
I did, yeah. I ran a bulletin board. This was on the downside of the bulletin board, career scene or whatever you want to call it. So it was already on its way out because the World Wide Web had just made its, like, people sysops who were running bulletin board systems were already moving to the web. And I remember one of my favorite bulletin board systems in West Texas. A man named Sean Dunbar, he ran that website, and he pretty soon, he was already ignoring his BBSs and moving on to websites, teaching himself HTML. And this must have been, early 90s. So I jumped on because I thought this was neat and cool when everybody was already heading out the door, slowly trickling out of the room, and I'm showing up like, "Hey guys, I've got a brand new BBS. Come call into my system." And I just remember sitting up till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, just staring at the computer as somebody new dialed in to my computer, and I just watched on the screen, just thought that was so cool. Creepy in hindsight, but at the time very cool, just to watch the remote interaction of, a ghost almost.
So did you still do any equivalent to that? I mean, obviously not.
I run websites. I do. I run websites unrelated to work. and my longest running one it's a punk rock and heavy metal message board. It used to show, used to display gigs for bands, local bands in the area, and it comes and it goes, and it's been up since about 2002. It's 2016 now, and I can in my head I can trace the line of when MySpace came around, when MySpace went away, and Facebook came around, and that it's still around because the traffic just you can't compete on those levels. But I do and I have run things like that since those BBS days, and
so it's a hobby as well as a career. It
is, yeah, and that helps me in my career too sometimes, because you can take trying to draw the line in the sand between work and home. It hasn't been too challenging for me, but the technology, the things that I use, the tools at home, sometimes I'll teach myself something on the weekend that I'll apply to work on Monday. Sometimes I'll learn something at work during the week that I'll take home on the weekend and apply to my hobby projects. So it's.
Do you see that as a big advantage for that kind of career then, the fact that you can do something very related?
I do. Yeah, I do. It's a huge advantage, because you can't do that with all jobs. I mean, computing is a lifestyle at times, and just like anything, if you can spend time on it, and you can let it control your life. Or you can control it, or find some happy medium in between. And it's a huge advantage. And my wife and I recently had our first child, and I'm currently finding my way to deplaning, or bringing down the computing usage at home in favor of being a father. So it'll be it's different. It is a huge advantage though to my professional career. Things that I learn, and it's neat. You can't do that with every job.
So what brought you to the UK?
I still work for the government, the military. I'm here with the American Forces. I took a job here in 2014, and we've been here for a couple of years now. We'll be here for a couple of years more, and then eventually we'll head back.
So in computing terms, are there big differences with how things are here compared to back home?
With computing in general?
Yeah, or just both, I suppose, purely in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the social reaction to it. Sure.
Differences. No, they're pretty similar in my experience. As a matter of fact, maybe it's because of living here in Cambridge or not. I feel like it's more around me. When we got here, I started paying attention in my effort to meet people and everything. Both my wife and I started getting interests in outside of our own home and outside of work, and I picked up on some IT groups and meetup groups, and I joined the Makespace, and I started building things over there, and it seems to be more enthusiastic, but that might not have to do with the differences between the U.S. and the U.K. It might have more to do with the fact that this is Cambridge, and it's very academic, and people here, the energy here with that sort of thing it's good, and if you're not going to the university here, that's no excuse not to learn something just because you're here. So I'm working on that.
So do you think Cambridge is quite a unique place? We've talked to quite a few interviewees about Cambridge as an entity.
Sure. I don't know how it compares to the rest of the UK, because I've never lived, and I've visited, but I've never lived anywhere else in the UK. But I feel like it is different because it's a university town, and it's at a minimum. I observed this early on. You just feel like you should be learning when you're here. I can't imagine, just looking at the people as we walk around the street, go to the market, or go to the shops, or do something in museums, and the chances and the opportunities to learn here. If you don't learn something here, you need to take an examination on yourself, because you can't walk down the street without learning something. Between walking down the street, and my wife and I are habitually on our phone, like randomly ask each other a question about something, like, oh look, isn't that where Professor Hawking teaches, or something similar to that, and one of us has the phone out looking it up on Wikipedia, something. It's the questions that arise from just living here can be quickly answered by that powerful little computer you've got in your pocket. So on some level, just being here, you're learning, and I feel like Cambridge it's a good place.
Is there any particular sort of technology leanings? We have this museum here because it's Cambridge and because there's a heritage, a computing heritage based here. Did you pick up a sense of that when you first arrived here?
I did, yeah. Some of the folks that I've met since we've been here, they all have seem to have some sort of important. It feels like here, because Cambridge is also kind of small, that it's easy to get involved with something, and particularly the Center for Computing History. I've been here before for retro video game nights, and just it's so neat walking around looking at things that, oh, I think my mom still has one of those in a closet somewhere. So between all the learning and the size and the with the university as the universities, multiple of them, as the center of the learning process here, or the driver of learning, it feels different. It almost feels like it's in the air, oddly. And there's turn the corner, there's something new. There's the Museum for Technology, Center for Computing History, the Makespace. Have you been to the Makespace? It's in this nice little corner over there, and they've got a nice thing going on. There's something new to do everywhere, and it has to do with this place, with this the largest village in the world. I think I heard somebody describe it as that before. So I do. I think it has. It feels different.
So you mentioned you just recently become a father. Do you have any intentions with son or daughter? Son. With regard to computing, do you encourage, discourage?
I definitely encourage it. My wife, she is a theater actress. She was in the States, and she has her degree in drama, and I have mine in forensics, and I do computing for a living. And so he can go whichever direction he chooses to go. But in the house, he's got drama major and he's got computing father, and I can see him doing both. I can see him focusing on one or the other, and whichever one he goes, we'll both encourage. But as far as computing goes, I intend performing a social experiment and bringing in an old Atari, let him play at that for a little while, and then bringing in a Nintendo, let him play at that for a little while, and bringing in a Super Nintendo, to see how that goes. I read that on the internet someplace, and I thought it was a very good experiment. It could either be a horrible parental thing to do, or it might be a very interesting thing just to watch and see how he develops, instead of just showing up on the screen with an Xbox One and look at everything that I can do, and just going crazy from decision overload to Pong, up, down, and then just progress like that. I don't want to expose him with the world of options immediately right away. So I kind of want to see how that goes. Hopefully it works out, and hopefully my wife doesn't put the axe on the project.
Is there anything that you would say you're proudest of, your key achievements in your life? Anything that you pick out?
Key achievements. Proudest of. I think I don't, in particular, no one thing. I don't have one thing that I can point at, but more of a similar thing that I think a lot of people in IT get pride from. You can't experience this last night. Just making a website for a buddy of mine, and I was just sitting there. It was bothering me just for the longest time. I couldn't get it to look right. It looked like a child, developed it. Maybe they would have done a better job. The code was good, the design was good, but I just couldn't get it to look like a professional website. And then I just did something last night. I started mucking with a few things, and then all of a sudden it just all seemed to come together, and I thought, this looks really good. And this was after months of just staring at this thing. And I think it comes down to what a lot of us have, just the feeling of triumph over a long struggle, whether it's a bug, that even if it's something as simple as I forgot a semicolon at the end of a line of code. When you find it, you feel silly sometimes, but you still have that feeling of triumph. And I don't know I can't think of many jobs off the top of my head that give you the opportunity to feel that triumph so often. after, you know, just over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter how long you tried or how many, just that it feels really good. And it's a good self-esteem booster. It makes you feel good about yourself when you can point to something and say, that silly struggle, I don't care how silly it was, it felt real good fixing that thing. So it's something you get to experience over and over again.
Any favorite machines?
Linux. Linux. I love Linux. I have at home a Mac. I have 2 Windows machines, and I have my Ubuntu machine. And I always turn back to, other than, you know, I don't have a 3D card in it, and it doesn't, you know, play games as well as others, but that's probably my own fault. I just love Linux, just the feeling of control. Like, it feels like every time you're on a computer system, it feels like you're a puppet master. You've got all the strings at your fingertips. But at different platforms, you feel like you've got a fewer or greater amount of strings. And Linux machines, I've always felt that I can do, there's nothing on this machine preventing me from doing something. If I just really figure out how to do it, it should be ready and waiting for me to come along and manipulate it. So my platforms are definitely Unix and Linux-based machines. And I'm going to thank you, Unix, for everything that you've done for us, but I've had to troubleshoot a Solaris machine recently, and I'm ready for you to be gone. So my good platforms, good machines, I like Linux.
Any, I don't know, people that have influenced you over the years, or key moments? I mean, you talked about obviously the arrival of the Mac with your father.
Sure.
Starting something.
Sure, yeah.
Any others as time's gone on?
If this conversation can extend to mobile phones, my first mobile phone was on September 10th, 2001. I'd resisted buying a mobile phone for a long time. I had a pager for an embarrassingly long time, and I bought my first mobile phone in September 10th, and on September 11th, I was using that thing to make a lot of phone calls, and it was. I'll never forget that, because at the same time, amongst everything else that was going on at the time, I was still very much aware that I was, you know, no matter how I was feeling or anything that was going on, didn't matter where I was in the city, I was able to open this phone and call somebody, and that was pretty. It was present during a lot of the emotions going on during those times, in those days. So, and ever since then, and I think I still have that phone. I think it's at home right now in a box. So, Sprint PCS, little green screen.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to tell the camera? Any stories you'd like to tell, or?
This is still truly, really, almost like the wild, wild west. The tech and the people, and sometimes you feel like things are you know, coming down, and governments and organizations that just don't understand what it is. They haven't taken the time to learn before they legislate or figure things out. At the same time, it's just still crazy. It's like riding this wild, unbalanced ride. And sometimes it's thrilling, and then other times you look over the edge and it's frightening and scary. At some point, it won't feel like that anymore. Who knows which direction it's going to go? But I think I'd like to say, just in addition to paying attention to the tech and the computers, also watch the people and how they react to it. Just, we're strange folks, and sometimes we're frightened, and sometimes we're inspiring, and sometimes you just wonder what the hell they're thinking. So, yeah, just seeing how HTML has grown, and web languages in general. Oh man, it's pretty astonishing how different it is between the early days and now. Whereas HTML is just a markup language used to basically highlight the structure of a document. This is a paragraph. This is a heading, and now it's moved all the way on to almost like C. I mean, not really, but you can interface with a lot more than just the browser and the computer, especially with things like Node.js and just the power of the web application has grown in astonishing ways. HTML5 I never thought when Flash came around, and I started messing around in Flash a little bit, Macromedia Flash at the time, and now with Canvas, I haven't even messed with HTML5 Canvas yet. I mean, but I never thought HTML would be able to do something like that. Animation and makes all sorts of games. But there's also a lot of, I feel like it's unbalanced at the moment too, because it seems to be easy to make a bad piece of web application software. I couldn't have imagined HTML just hogging all this memory and RAM, but now it does. Now it seems to. During that brief period of time where I wasn't doing IT work, I had ignored JavaScript up until that point. I desperately ignored it. I didn't want to learn it. I didn't like it. I hoped it would go away. And then so many years later, I came back into IT work, and I showed up and I said, okay, great. What's changed since I've been gone? Is JavaScript still around? Yes, it is. And it is. Everybody's using JavaScript. So I sat down and I realized I better learn JavaScript. So now here I am trying to catch up. And that goes to the whole, if you blink, you'll miss something important phrase. But yeah, web languages like HTML, PHP, Python, that was an older language. I didn't realize that it was going to make a resurgence. And Ruby, I think it's going to continue to go that way. I think the web applications are going to continue being more and more prevalent, more and more important, replacing a lot of native applications that you normally install on the desktop. I don't think that's a particularly revolutionary thing to say. I think it's almost an observation at this point. I think it's a lot of computers it's just a lot of little computers. It's similar to PCs. Just take the PC, shrink it down, put it on something that you can wear, and it still suffers from similar problems: security and resource constraints, batteries to computing power. You know, if you're making this thing that somebody wears, are you also considering the security ramifications of it? Or are you not, because you couldn't put enough memory into it or enough battery power to, you know, I don't even know if any of them have firewalls that come with them. I don't think any of them have firewalls. It might be a little bit of similar to computers in the 90s before viruses started just banging away at the perimeter, and people started realizing that firewalls and antiviruses are going to be important. I think maybe some of that workload, the viruses and the security is being offloaded to the cloud infrastructure. At some point, maybe it's not going to be on the device that you're wearing. Maybe it's going to be at some node before it gets to the device. But I don't know if anybody is really thinking enough of things like that. So it might be a small little resurgence of the mid to late 90s, and nobody really thinking about those sorts of things. I think it's a lot of small computers, and I think it's neat. I really do. From a fascinated hobby standpoint, it's really neat. But it's also got a bit of the echo of the, well, what happens if somebody thinks to do this? Is anybody thinking to counter that? It feels a little bit like the 90s in a way, this new little era.